My name is Andre Kindness, Principal Analyst serving infrastructure and operations at Forrester Research, specifically within the networking space. I think we're in the early stages of the development. Right now, Forrester sees about 5% adoption rate of it, but yet I think that's going to change significantly over the next 5 years. A lot of it's just the comfort level and the awareness around passive optical LAN and the passive optical network industry within the enterprise space itself is pretty low. And while there's been a lot of education by various vendors and societies out there, I think really IoT is going to be driving some of the awareness and growth in those areas. But like I said, we're at the beginning stages of adoption. Well, there's been a lot of papers around, advocating energy and cost savings and operational savings itself. But I really believe the true aspect of what's really going to change the game for the adoption of passive optical LAN within the enterprise space is really going to be IoT. And really because you look at the magnitude of the amount of devices that are going to be connecting and where they're located and the relative needs of that versus what traditional LAN can actually offer. There's a chasm between the two, and I see passive optical LAN as dividing or creating that bridge between the chasm of IoT and the locations and the needs behind IoT relative to what traditional LAN can do today. You hear about a lot of in campus environments and tall buildings and stuff, but I really think another area that's really going to have a larger traction towards the adoption area is you look at anything in manufacturing, processing, solar, wind, smart energy areas. And the reason why I bring that up is because of you look at the amount of cable runs that electrical runs that these locations have. You could have miles within a facility itself. You look at some of the positive aspects of passive optical LAN, you think about the fact that you can reach long distances. You can split instead of having a single or multiple connections and requiring multiple switches, distributed area to reach those areas. You can use a single fiber and split it as needed and split that even further down. So when we look at a manufacturing site per se, we think about flow meters, we think about strain release, we think about temperature gauges, involving around pipelines or exothermic reaction chambers themselves. You start to realize there's a lot of devices that need that connectivity, and wireless is not going to be the way to go for most of these sites. So what do you turn to? You turn to something that's going to be stable in these environments that don't produce a lot of electromagnetic connections or radiation that cause issues within these environments themselves. And so passive optical LAN with distance, with the ability to split it, with the ability to not radiate any type of energy and produce connections in those areas would be a dominant type of connectivity for a lot of the devices that we see. So, manufacturing, processing, we think about solar wind fields, we think about energy fields themselves, big distances that need to be covered, and yet connectivity and distance limitations of current technologies can't suffice for that. And that's where I see passive optical LAN and networking itself being the major connectivity medium. Radio backhaul? Yeah, because you got distance to come over, and then very similar to the shared medium of wireless using as a radio network backhaul. Seems a very logical area already being used in fiber to the home where you're making those long distance connections. Seems like that's a relatively straightforward answer. And there's fiber already being used in those locations, and so it just makes sense to use passive optical LAN as the transport medium inside of those fiber. Yeah, I would say that actually you think about who's going to be deploying a lot of the new networks out there. Well, we typically fall back and think about the networking operations and networking teams within the business itself or the enterprise. I really believe that if you look at networks themselves, and especially when I brought up about manufacturing or smart cities, it's really going to be with those processing and manufacturing and smart city engineers. I think where we start to educate that type of professional about connectivity. They know about connectivity today. They just are using proprietary forms or one-off types of things going on historically in those industries. But passive optical LAN, is such a great solution for those types of environments. And they're the ones actually designing these areas, and they're the ones actually, setting up the specifications and working with the vendors. That the passive optical LAN industry and the vendors themselves should be going out to the universities and educate them, going out to the International Society of Mechanical Engineers or the processing engineers and talking about and creating white papers for these types of professionals to incorporate that type of design into it. And the other thing is because we also have to think about not just who's going to own it and start to deploy it, But what we've seen traditionally in networking professionals within a traditional enterprise is they're slow to adopt things, and they'll throw up a lot of issues on why they don't do it. If you look over the last 5 years, adoption's been relatively low with passive optical LAN with that traditional group, and I think that's still going to be an issue to move them forward. And so to really bypass that and get the products out there and start to invest in the area that's the right area itself, we really need to educate a new set of professionals that are much open to having solutions that would accommodate the areas that need to. When we think about in traditional engineering, it's fit, form, and function. Passive optical LAN would be a perfect scenario for a lot of these challenges that the engineers are dealing with within these environments. Take the lessons learned from what you've seen, and you've seen this other industries start small, but start educating them, give them the skills, give them the white papers, even go out and have that part of the education of a university system where they learn about some of the advances in this area as part of their curriculum. So approaching universities and adding that part of the curriculum as well would be a smart idea. Really the question is who wouldn't benefit, what region wouldn't benefit from it, right? And if we think about the growth of the various industries and verticals, I mentioned manufacturing earlier, but even healthcare would be another perfect scenario for passive optical LAN. So when we think about a lot of the verticals out there adopting this technology, I don't really see a region that wouldn't, be open and leverage this type of technology itself. So fiber to the home, I think one of the things you think about is just providing a connection to the home. But in these environments, what we have to start to think about is IoT devices and applications and stuff have very different needs, and the quality of service around them and the security around them is very different inside of a business versus what fiber to the home is. So when we think about the needs of what passive optical LAN offers, it's much more in alignment to what we've seen in the traditional LAN area, where we need to have controls, we need to prioritize different applications themselves and think about making sure we have good, reliable connections in there. Well, traditionally fiber to the home is, people had connections, there wasn't as much guarantees, and customers maybe weren't quite as happy, or they're happy, but when it comes to connectivity within a business, the business relies on every part of its business being connected together, and so if something goes down, that's revenue the business loses. So the network itself is such a critical item to the business. It's the nervous system of the business itself. So when we think about passive optical LAN and the features and functions around that, make it much more akin to that environment versus what you see typically in fiber to the home. So I feel like it's going to be more of a coexistence between the two. You'll start to see passive optical LAN being brought in to supplement the things that traditional LAN can't do. The reason why, as I mentioned earlier, was that traditional networking professionals are a little slow to make that change. And so what we'll see is the adoption with, if we think about security cameras, or we think about door locks, or we think about even HVAC registers where you want to control the airflows, and there's much more of the smart buildings. I see this kind of investment where passive optical LAN starts to offer that type of connection, and then you see the coexistence of where personal computers and even access points, or maybe they go to the other side, are still on the traditional LAN. You see them being worked, the environment hosting both of them for a lot of them. As I said, the reason why mostly is because it takes time for the networking professionals to see the value in other areas and to do a larger adoption and maybe do a full replacement. So for a long period of time, I'll see a coexistence between traditional LAN and passive optical LAN within the campus environments.